Welcome back to Her Journey, where we share stories of women who found their strength in the darkest moments and emerged victorious. I'm your host, and today's story comes from Lily, a 55-year-old woman who discovered that sometimes the people we love most can be the cruelest of all. Before we dive into Lily's incredible journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimate triumph, don't just listen and leave. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Trust me, this story will stay with you long after it ends. And if you're enjoying this story, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments below. Have you ever had a family member treat you like nothing more than a bank account? Your stories matter to our community, and I read every single comment. Now, let's dive into Lily's story. But I have to warn you, this one is going to take you on an emotional roller coaster. From heartbreak to revenge to ultimate triumph, Lily's journey will remind you that it's never too late to choose yourself. My name is Lily Adams, and I'm 55 years old. People tell me I'm beautiful for my age, with my silver-streaked auburn hair and the kind of smile that lights up a room. But on that Tuesday afternoon in March, standing in my pristine New Hampshire kitchen, I felt anything but beautiful. I felt broken. The phone call came at 2:17 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was watching the antique clock on my mantel when it rang, thinking about how peaceful my afternoon had been. I was planning dinner, humming softly to myself, completely unprepared for the words that would change everything. "Mom, please don't bother coming. Just send the check." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the marble countertop, so hard my knuckles went white, my breath catching in my throat. On the other end of the line, my son Greg's voice was flat, dismissive, devoid of any warmth or affection. "What do you mean, don't bother coming?" I managed to whisper, though I already knew what he meant. "The baby shower. Leslie's baby shower. My first grandchild celebration, and I was being uninvited." "It's just a baby shower, Mom," Greg continued, his tone growing more impatient. "Leslie says it'll be awkward if you're there. You know how things are." In the background, I could hear her laughing. Leslie, my daughter-in-law of 3 years, the woman who had systematically worked to poison my relationship with my only child. The woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to Greg's inheritance and a convenient source of funding for their lifestyle. How did we get here? I wondered, my mind racing back through the years. Greg had been such a loving child, so affectionate and loyal. He used to cling to my hand in public, tell me I was the most beautiful woman in the world, promise he'd take care of me when I got old. I remembered the day he was born, how I had held him in my arms and promised him the world. I was only 28 then, barely more than a child myself, but I had been so determined to give him everything I never had. His father had walked out when I was 6 months pregnant, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility. I had raised Greg entirely on my own, working 2 jobs to afford his private school, saving every penny for his college fund. I remembered his first day of kindergarten, how he had cried and begged me not to leave him. "I want to stay with you, Mama," he had sobbed, wrapping his little arms around my neck. "You're my best friend." I had cried in my car for 20 minutes after dropping him off. I remembered high school graduation, when he had given a speech as valedictorian and had dedicated it to me. "My mother sacrificed everything so I could have every opportunity," he had said, looking directly at me in the audience. "She worked multiple jobs, never bought herself anything nice, and put my dreams before her own. Everything I am is because of her love." I had sobbed with pride that day. When had that loving little boy become this cold stranger who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience? The transformation didn't happen overnight, and that's what makes this story so heartbreaking. The people who hurt us the most are often the ones we've loved the longest. "Of course, darling," I heard myself say, forcing a smile into my voice even though my heart was shattering. I'll put something in the mail. Great. Thanks, Mom. I'll talk to you later. The line went dead.
No will be.
No love you. Just silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the phone in my hand. 27 years ago, I had held this same son as a newborn, promising him I would love him unconditionally, protect him from the world, give him everything I had. I had been a single mother, working 2 jobs to put him through private school, then college, then graduate school. I had sacrificed my own dreams, my own relationships, my own happiness to ensure he had every opportunity. And now, he was telling me not to bother coming to celebrate my first grandchild. This is what I raised, I thought bitterly. This is what my sacrifices created. The house felt suffocating suddenly. I walked through the rooms I had lovingly decorated, past the family photos that now seemed to mock me, up the stairs to my bedroom. In the back of my walk-in closet, behind the evening gowns I rarely wore anymore, was a small lockbox I hadn't opened in years. Inside were documents I had hoped never to use. Financial records, legal papers, contingency plans I had made when Greg first married Leslie, and I began to see the writing on the wall. Maybe it's time, I thought, my hands steady for the first time since the phone call. Maybe it's finally time. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my study with a cup of tea and a legal pad, making lists, plans, decisions that would change everything. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. But first, let me tell you a little more about what led to this moment, because understanding the full scope of Lily's sacrifice makes what happens next even more powerful. For 27 years, I had been the primary source of support in Greg's life. When he wanted to play hockey in high school, I worked overtime for 6 months to afford the equipment and fees. When he decided to change his major in college from business to fine arts, I took out a second mortgage to cover the additional tuition costs. When he graduated and couldn't find a job in his field, I paid his rent for 8 months while he figured things out. When he met Leslie, I was genuinely happy for him. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and seemed to make him happy. I ignored the little red flags at first, the way she would roll her eyes when I offered advice, the snide comments about my outdated decorating style, the way she would steer conversations away from me whenever we were all together. I told myself I was being oversensitive. Leslie was young, from a wealthy family, and probably just needed time to warm up to me. I bent over backward to make her feel welcome, to show her that I wasn't trying to interfere in their relationship. But the signs became harder to ignore after their engagement. Leslie had very specific ideas about their wedding, and every single one of them required money that Greg didn't have. The venue she wanted cost $15,000. Her dream dress was $3,200. The photographer she insisted on was another $4,500. Mom, I know it's a lot, Greg had said when he called to ask for help with the wedding expenses. But Leslie's family is contributing too, and we really want this to be perfect. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, you know? Of course, I said yes. I always said yes. I liquidated my retirement savings to help pay for their dream wedding, telling myself that seeing my son happy was worth any sacrifice. At the wedding, I sat alone at a table in the back while Leslie's friends and family filled the seats of honor. During the reception, when Greg gave his speech, he thanked everyone who made this day possible but never mentioned me specifically. Leslie's father, who had contributed far less than I had, was acknowledged by name for his generosity and support. That should have been my wake-up call. But I was still making excuses, still hoping that things would get better once they settled into married life. And this is so important for anyone listening who might be in a similar situation. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Don't make excuses. Don't hope they'll change. Don't sacrifice yourself for people who don't appreciate your sacrifices. And this is where Lily's story takes a turn that will leave you speechless. Sometimes, When people show you who they really are, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is believe them. 3 days later, I drove to the post office in town. The elderly clerk, Mrs. Henderson, smiled warmly as I approached her window. "Another package for your son?" she asked kindly. She knew me well. I had been sending Greg care packages and checks for years. "Something like that," I replied, sliding the envelope across the counter. Inside that envelope was not the check Greg expected. Instead, there was a single sheet of my personal stationery with 4 words written in my careful handwriting. "This is my decision." I imagined Leslie tearing open the envelope with her perfectly manicured nails, expecting to find money to fund their extravagant lifestyle. I picture her face when she discovered there was nothing there but my quiet declaration of independence. Let them wonder, I thought as I drove home. Let them try to figure out what I mean. 2 hours later, my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and smiled for the first time in days. Greg. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. By evening, I had 17 missed calls and a dozen increasingly frantic text messages. "Mom, what did you mean by that note? Call me back, please. This isn't funny. Leslie is really upset. Can you just explain what's going on?"
Mom.
Pick up the phone. "This is ridiculous. What are you, 12 years old? Leslie says you're probably having some kind of breakdown. Should we be worried?" The progression of the messages was fascinating to watch. They started confused, moved to frustrated, then to angry, and finally to concerned, but only concerned about what my behavior might mean for them, not concerned about my well-being. Notice how quickly they jumped to assuming Lily was having a breakdown rather than considering that their own behavior might have consequences. This is classic manipulation. When someone starts setting boundaries, the toxic people in their life immediately paint them as unstable or unreasonable. I deleted them all without responding and poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time in years, I was enjoying my son's attention, even if it was driven by confusion and concern rather than love. The wine was a 2018 Pinot Noir from a local vineyard, something I had bought for myself months ago but never opened because I was always saving it for a special occasion. Well, this felt pretty special. The day I finally stopped begging for love from someone who only valued me for my checkbook deserved celebrating. As I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset over the mountains in the distance, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. My phone was silent for the first time in as long as I could remember. No one was asking me for anything, demanding my time, or making me feel guilty for not doing enough. It was blissful. The next morning brought more calls, more messages. This time, Leslie had taken the phone. "Lily, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's immature and hurtful.
Greg is really worried about you.
Are you having some kind of breakdown? Because if you are, we can help you find a good therapist. There's no shame in admitting you need help." The audacity was breathtaking. This from the woman who had laughed in the background when my son told me not to bother coming to my own granddaughter's baby shower. This is such a common tactic from toxic people. When you stop allowing them to treat you badly, they immediately suggest that you're the one with the problem. They'll gaslight you, question your mental health, and try to make you feel like you're being unreasonable for having boundaries. I texted back a single word. Noted. It was the same response I would give to a work email that I acknowledged, but didn't feel required further discussion. Cold, professional, dismissive. Everything our relationship had been reduced to, thanks to their treatment of me. Then I turned off my phone and began making some calls of my own. What Lily did next was masterful. Instead of dramatic confrontations or angry outbursts, she chose something far more powerful: strategic withdrawal. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply removing yourself from people who don't value you. The first call I made was to my lawyer, Richard Pemberton. We had worked together for years on estate planning, and he knew my family situation better than most. "Lily, How can I help you today? Richard, I need to make some changes. Significant changes. Within a week, I had completely restructured my financial life. The beach house in Maine that Greg had always assumed would be his inheritance sold to a lovely retired couple from Boston who planned to turn it into a bed and breakfast. The proceeds went into a trust with very specific instructions about disbursement. Let me paint you a picture of this beach house, because it represents so much more than just property in Lily's story. The beach house had been my sanctuary for 15 years. I had bought it with money I inherited from my own mother, planning to make it a place where Greg and I could create new memories together. It was a charming Cape Cod-style home with weathered shingles, white trim, and a wraparound porch that looked out over Casco Bay. I had spent countless weekends there, often alone, restoring it to its former glory. I had sanded and painted every piece of trim, refinished the hardwood floors, and lovingly tended the garden that bloomed with hydrangeas and beach roses every summer. Greg had loved that house as a child. We had spent entire summers there when he was young, building sandcastles, collecting shells, and reading books together on the porch swing. He had learned to sail in the little bay, caught his first fish from the dock, and had his first real conversation about his father's absence while we walked on the beach at sunset. But as he got older, the visits became less frequent. College took priority, then his job, then Leslie. The last time he had been to the beach house was 3 years ago, for exactly 2 hours, to check on things, while they were in Maine for Leslie's friend's wedding. Leslie had spent those 2 hours making lists of everything she wanted to change when they inherited the property. "This kitchen is so dated," she had said, wrinkling her nose at the vintage 1950s appliances I had lovingly restored. "And these wood floors are in terrible shape. We'd probably need to gut the whole first floor." Greg had nodded along with everything she said, never once defending the home where he had spent the happiest days of his childhood. Selling it felt like cutting the last emotional tie between us. But it also felt like liberation. Sometimes letting go of the physical symbols of our relationships is the first step toward emotional freedom. The joint savings account I had shared with Greg for emergencies
Closed.
every penny transferred to accounts he had never heard of, with financial institutions he couldn't access. This account had been Leslie's idea, actually. Shortly after their wedding, she had suggested that it would be practical for Greg to have access to some of my funds in case of emergencies. "You never know what might happen," she had said sweetly. "What if you had a medical emergency and couldn't access your accounts? Greg could help you." Of course, the emergencies that drained the account were things like Leslie's designer handbag obsession, Greg's expensive golf club membership, and their spontaneous weekend trips to luxury resorts. Somehow, my actual emergencies, like when my furnace broke in the middle of winter or when I needed dental work, never seemed to qualify for assistance from the account I had funded. My will, which had left everything to Greg with the understanding that he would take care of his mother in her old age, completely rewritten. Richard Pembroke, my lawyer, had been hesitant about the changes at first. "Lily, are you sure about this? These are very significant modifications. Perhaps you should take some time to think it over, maybe discuss it with Greg." "Richard," I interrupted. "If I wanted to discuss this with Greg, I would have. But since he's made it clear that he only values my relationship when he needs money, I see no reason to consult him about how I choose to distribute my assets." The new will was a work of art. Everything would go into a charitable trust that would fund art programs for underprivileged children. Greg would receive exactly $1, along with a letter explaining that this was the same amount of consideration he had shown me in recent years. And this is where Lily's revenge starts to get really strategic. She's not just reacting emotionally. She's making calculated decisions that will have lasting impact. But I didn't stop there. I began what I privately called the Great Disappearing Act. Greg's calls went unanswered. His emails received single-word responses. Noted. Received. Acknowledged. No warmth, no elaboration, no invitation for further conversation. When he showed up at my house unannounced the following Saturday, I met him at the door, but didn't invite him in. Mom, what the hell is going on? Leslie said you sold the beach house. Is that true? I looked at my son, really looked at him. At 27, he was still handsome, but there was something weak about his jawline now, something entitled in the way he carried himself. When had he stopped being my loving little boy and become this demanding stranger? I'm not your bank, Greg, I said calmly. I'm your mother. Or I was. I watched his face change as my words sank in. What's that supposed to mean? It means that I've spent 27 years being treated like an ATM with emotions. It means that I'm tired of being valued only for what I can provide financially. It means that when my own son tells me not to bother coming to my grandchild's baby shower, perhaps it's time to stop bothering altogether. Greg's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mom, Leslie didn't mean. Leslie meant exactly what she said. And so did you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do. I closed the door and watched through the peephole as he stood there for 5 minutes, clearly wrestling with whether to knock again. Finally, he walked back to his car, pulling out his phone immediately, probably calling Leslie to report that his mother had finally grown a spine. That night, I poured myself another glass of wine and opened my laptop. I had some research to do. You know what I love about this moment in Lily's story? She's not acting out of pure emotion. She's taking time to reflect, to remember, to really understand how she got to this point. That's the difference between revenge and justice. Justice requires clarity. I spent the next few days going through old journals I had kept throughout Greg's childhood. Reading my own words from years past was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Greg told me today that I'm the most beautiful mommy in the world. He wants to marry me when he grows up. I explained about how that works, and he said, well then, I'll just take care of you forever. My heart is so full. That entry was from when he was 6. I remembered that day so clearly. We had been at the park, and an older woman had complimented me on my handsome little man. Greg had beamed with pride and spent the rest of the afternoon planning how he was going to take care of me when I got old. He was going to buy me a house with a garden, he said, and visit me every day. Greg made the honor roll again. I'm so proud. When I told him we'd celebrate at his favorite restaurant, he said, can we go somewhere you like instead, Mom? You work so hard for me. Sometimes I wonder how I got so lucky. Age 12. This was during my hardest financial period, when I was working 2 jobs and still struggling to make ends meet. Greg had noticed how tired I was, how I never bought anything for myself. That night, he had insisted we go to the little Italian place I loved instead of the expensive steakhouse he preferred. He had saved his allowance for 3 weeks to pay for my meal. Graduation day. Greg gave the most beautiful speech about how his mother sacrificed everything for his education. I cried through the whole thing. He's going to do such great things with his life. Age 18. I could still recite parts of that speech from memory. My mother worked 2 jobs so I could go to the best schools, he had said. She drove a 10-year-old car, so I could have a laptop for college. She wore the same winter coat for 5 years so I could go on the senior trip to Europe. Everything I am, everything I hope to become, is because she loved me enough to put my dreams before her own. The audience had given him a standing ovation. I had sobbed with pride. Greg called to tell me about Leslie. He sounds so happy, but something in his voice when he talks about her different. He said she's sophisticated and knows what she wants. I hope she knows how lucky she is. Age 24. This was the beginning of the end, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Greg had met Leslie at a company party, and he was completely smitten. She was everything he had never experienced growing up. Wealthy, polished, connected to a world of privilege that we had never been part of. Looking back, I could see how that relationship had changed him. Suddenly, our modest home wasn't good enough. My simple cooking wasn't sophisticated enough. My clothes, my car, my entire lifestyle became sources of embarrassment rather than pride. Leslie made another comment about how old-fashioned my house is. Greg laughed along with her. When did my son start seeing me through her eyes? Age 25. This entry was particularly painful to read because I could hear the hurt in my own words from 2 years ago. Leslie had been systematically undermining my confidence, making little digs about my decorating choices, my cooking, my appearance. And Greg, who had once defended me against any criticism, had started joining in. Greg asked for money for a down payment on their house. $50,000. I said yes, of course, but he barely thanked me. Leslie was in the background talking about how grateful I should be that they're letting me help. Age 26.
$52,000.
I had liquidated my entire emergency fund to help them buy their dream house, and Leslie had somehow made it sound like they were doing me a favor by accepting it. And this pattern is so important for anyone listening to understand. Toxic people don't just wake up one day and decide to treat you badly. It's a gradual process of boundary pushing, of normalizing disrespect, of making you feel like you should be grateful for their attention. I closed the journal and cried. Not the desperate, heartbroken sobs of someone in shock, but the quiet, determined tears of someone who had finally seen the truth clearly. My son hadn't changed overnight. The shift had been gradual, so subtle that I had missed it until it was too late. Leslie hadn't stolen him from me. She had simply encouraged and amplified qualities that were already there. The entitlement, the expectation that I would always be available, always be giving, always be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. Well, I thought, wiping my eyes and opening my laptop, it's time to stop being grateful. I began researching small towns where property was affordable and no one would know my story. Places where I could start over as just Lily instead of Greg's mother or the woman who gives money to everyone. The internet search led me down a rabbit hole of possibilities. There were artist colonies in New Mexico, small coastal towns in Oregon, mountain communities in Colorado. Each place offered something I had never had: anonymity, independence, and the chance to discover who I was when I wasn't constantly giving pieces of myself away. This research phase is so crucial in Lily's journey. She's not running away impulsively. She's making strategic decisions about her future. I found the perfect place, a small artistic community in Oregon called Cedar Falls. The town was known for attracting writers, painters, and other creative types who valued privacy and authenticity over social status. There was a little cottage for sale on the shores of a pristine lake, surrounded by pine trees and absolute silence. The listing photos took my breath away. It was a charming craftsman-style home with exposed beams, a stone fireplace, and windows that looked out over water, so clear you could see the bottom. The description mentioned that the previous owner had been a landscape painter who had added a studio space with north-facing windows. The price was reasonable, far less than what I would get for my current house in New Hampshire. I could buy it outright with cash and still have money left over to support myself comfortably for years. I made an offer that same day. While I waited for the real estate process to move forward, I continued my strategic withdrawal from Greg's life. His calls became less frequent as he realized I wasn't going to engage in the drama he seemed to crave. Leslie's attempts to manipulate me through guilt and concern fell on deaf ears. Each time my phone rang with their number, I felt a little stronger. Each ignored call was a small act of rebellion against 27 years of being taken for granted. I was done being manipulated. Done being taken for granted. Done being anyone's backup plan or safety net. For the first time in 27 years, I was putting myself first. And this is where Lily's story takes a turn that shows us the difference between reacting emotionally and responding strategically. What she does next isn't just about getting back at Greg and Leslie. It's about reclaiming her entire identity. But before I could fully disappear into my new life, I had to deal with the practical matters of my old one. There were financial accounts to close, mail to forward, and one particularly satisfying conversation to have with my financial advisor. James Morrison had been managing my investments for 8 years, and he had watched me drain account after account to fund Greg's lifestyle. He had gently questioned some of my larger withdrawals, but I had always assured him that I knew what I was doing. "Lily," he said when I called to schedule an appointment, "I have to say, I'm relieved to hear from you. Some of your recent financial decisions have been concerning." When I arrived at his office the next day, James didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Lily, I need to ask you directly. Has someone been pressuring you to make these withdrawals? Because the pattern I'm seeing is consistent with financial elder abuse." Elder abuse. The words hit me like a slap. I was only 55, hardly elderly, but James was right about the pattern. "James, I appreciate your concern, but I'm making some major changes in my life. I need you to liquidate my remaining accounts and transfer everything to a new firm in Oregon." His eyebrows shot up. "Oregon? Lily, this is very sudden. Are you sure you've thought this through?" "I've thought about little else for the past month." "I'm starting over, James. Completely." "What about Greg? Does he know about these changes?" "Greg," I said carefully, "will learn about these changes when and if I choose to tell him. Until then, I need your assurance that any inquiries about my accounts will be referred to my new attorney." James leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "Lily, you seem different. More determined." "I am different. I'm finally putting myself first." The paperwork took 2 hours to complete, but when I walked out of James's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. Every financial tie to my old life had been severed. Greg would have no way to track my assets, no way to guilt me into future loans, no way to treat me like his personal aim ever again. This financial independence is so crucial to Lily's story. You can't really be free from toxic people if they still have access to your resources. Sometimes the most important boundary you can set is a financial one. That evening, I received a call from my realtor in Oregon. The cottage had been accepted, and the sellers were willing to close in just 2 weeks. "They're motivated sellers," she explained. "The previous owner passed away, and the family just wants to settle the estate quickly. If you can be flexible on the closing date, they'll include all the furniture and art supplies."
Perfect.
I could disappear into my new life even faster than I had planned. The next morning, I began the process of packing up my old life. As I sorted through 27 years of memories, I found myself making 2 piles, things that brought me joy and things that reminded me of my failures as a mother. Into the first pile went my books, my china collection, photo albums from Greg's childhood, and mementos from trips I had taken alone. Into the second pile went the expensive gifts I had bought Greg over the years that he had never used, thank you cards that were polite but cold, and photographs from events where I looked happy but felt invisible. The second pile was much larger than the first. This sorting process is so symbolic. Lily is literally separating her joy from her pain, her authentic self from the person she became when she was trying to buy love. I donated most of the second pile to charity, keeping only a few items that served as reminders of lessons learned. The rest of my belongings fit into a modest moving truck that would take them across the country to my new life. 3 days before I was scheduled to leave for Oregon, Leslie called. I almost didn't answer. The number showed up as unknown, but something made me pick up. "Lily? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." Leslie's voice was different, strained, desperate in a way I had never heard before. "What can I do for you, Leslie?"
We need to talk.
"Can I come over? I'm rather busy with moving preparations." "Moving?" Her voice shot up an octave. "What do you mean, moving? Where are you moving?" And here we see Leslie's panic as she realizes that her financial safety net is disappearing. I'm relocating to Oregon. I leave in 3 days. Oregon? But what about Greg? What about Madison? What about them? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought she had hung up. Lily, please. I'm coming over. We need to discuss this like adults. She hung up before I could refuse. 20 minutes later, Leslie was at my door. I had never seen her look so disheveled. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore no makeup, and her clothes looked like she had slept in them. My God, Lily, what have you done to this place? I looked around my living room, seeing it through her eyes. Most of my furniture was gone, leaving only the basics I would need for my final few days. Boxes lined the walls, labeled with destinations like kitchen, Oregon, and books, new study. I'm moving, Leslie. I told you that. But you can't just leave. What about our family? What about Madison? Madison barely knows I exist, thanks to you and Greg. As for our family, I think recent events have shown that we have very different definitions of what family means. Leslie began to pace around my empty living room, her hands fluttering nervously. Look, I know we've had our differences, but this is extreme. Running away to Oregon? It's so dramatic. I'm not running away, Leslie. I'm running toward something better. But what about Greg?
He's devastated by all this.
He loves you. I almost laughed. Greg loves my checkbook. There's a difference. That's not fair. Yes, we've asked for help occasionally, but that's what families do. They help each other. Help each other? I repeated. Tell me, Leslie, when was the last time you or Greg helped me with anything? When did you last offer to babysit so I could have a night out, or bring me soup when I was sick, or just call to see how I was doing? She opened and closed her mouth several times before finally saying, We've been busy with the baby. You've been busy for 3 years, Leslie. Ever since you decided I wasn't sophisticated enough for your social circle. I never said that. You didn't have to. Your actions spoke volumes. The eye rolls when I offered advice. The way you steered conversations away from me at family gatherings. The comments about my old-fashioned house and outdated style. And finally, telling Greg to uninvite me from my own granddaughter's baby shower because my presence would be awkward. This confrontation is so important because it shows Lily finally speaking her truth without trying to spare anyone's feelings. Leslie's face crumpled. I was hormonal. Pregnancy makes you say things you don't mean. Were you hormonal when you laughed in the background during that phone call? Were you hormonal when you posted on social media about your perfect little family while excluding me from every milestone? Were you hormonal when you spent months planning how to redecorate my beach house after you inherited it? How did you know about your plans for the beach house? Leslie, you weren't exactly subtle. You made lists right in front of me. She began to cry then, not the delicate tears of someone trying to manipulate, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who had finally realized the consequences of their actions. Lily, please.
I'm sorry.
I know I haven't been the daughter-in-law you deserved, but we need you. Madison needs her grandmother. Madison needs parents who can support her without relying on stolen money and manipulated relatives. We don't steal. $23,000 from our joint account. $50,000 for your house down payment. $15,000 for your wedding. Money I gave freely because I thought we were family, but that you took as if it were owed to you. When did you plan to pay any of it back, Leslie? She had no answer for that. And now you're here, in my empty house, begging me not to leave. Not because you'll miss me, not because you value our relationship, but because you're panicking about losing your source of financial support. That's not true, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Tell me honestly, Leslie, if I had no money, would you and Greg still want me in your lives? The silence that followed was answer enough. I walked to the door and opened it. I think you should go now. I have packing to finish. Leslie stood there for a moment, tears streaming down her face, looking younger and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. Lily, please. I know we've made mistakes, but families should forgive each other. We can start over. We can do better. You're right, I said gently. Families should forgive each other. Families should also respect each other, support each other, and treat each other with kindness. When you and Greg learn how to do those things, maybe we can talk about forgiveness. She walked slowly to her car, turning back once, as if she wanted to say something else. Instead, she got in and drove away. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. For the first time in 3 years, I had said everything I needed to say to Leslie. I had been honest about how her behavior had affected me, and I hadn't let guilt or manipulation change my mind. This confrontation shows such growth in Lily's character. She's not cruel or vindictive. She's simply honest about the impact of their behavior and firm at her boundaries. The next 3 days passed in a blur of final preparations. I closed my local bank accounts, forwarded my mail to Oregon, and said goodbye to the few neighbors who had become friends over the years. On my last evening in New Hampshire, I sat on my empty back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over the mountains. My phone had been blissfully quiet since Leslie's visit. No desperate calls from Greg, no attempts at emotional manipulation, no last-ditch efforts to guilt me into staying. Either they had finally accepted my decision, or they were planning something else entirely. I would find out soon enough. But for now, I was simply enjoying the peace of knowing that tomorrow I would wake up in a place where no one expected anything from me except to be myself. The moving truck arrived at dawn. Leslie's attempts to manipulate me through guilt and concern fell on deaf ears. I was done being manipulated, done being taken for granted, done being anyone's backup plan or safety net. For the first time in 27 years, I was putting myself first. And this is where Lily's story takes another heartbreaking turn. Because just when you think people can't hurt you any deeper, they find new ways to prove you wrong. 2 months after my Declaration of Independence, Leslie gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Madison Rose, and according to the social media posts I saw, before I unfollowed them both, she was perfect in every way. But here's what makes this part of the story so painful. Lily learned about her granddaughter's birth not through a loving phone call, but through social media. Can you imagine? I waited for the call. Surely, despite everything that had happened, Greg would want to tell his mother about the birth of his first child. Surely this moment would break through whatever wall Leslie had built between us. Surely becoming a father would remind him of the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him. The call never came. Instead, I learned about my granddaughter's birth the same way strangers did, through Facebook posts filled with pictures of the new little family and captions about doing it all on our own and building our own traditions. Each post felt like a deliberate slap in the face. Photos of Leslie in her hospital bed, radiant and exhausted, with Greg gazing adoringly at their daughter. Pictures of tiny Madison's perfect little fingers and toes. Videos of Greg reading to his newborn daughter, promising to always protect her and give her everything she needs. The message was clear. I wasn't part of their family anymore. I wasn't wanted or needed. They were creating their own narrative, one that didn't include the grandmother who had made their lifestyle possible. What's particularly cruel about this is that Greg and Leslie were using social media to publicly exclude Lily while simultaneously celebrating family bonds. It's emotional warfare disguised as joy. But the posts that really twisted the knife were the ones about doing it all on our own. Leslie shared a long, heartfelt caption about how proud she was of Greg for being such a devoted father and provider, how they had built their life together through hard work and determination, and how grateful she was to be raising their daughter with strong family values. No mention of the woman who had funded their down payment, their wedding, their lifestyle. No acknowledgement of the grandmother who had been excluded from this momentous occasion. Just a carefully crafted narrative that painted them as self-made young parents who had achieved everything through their own efforts. The comments on these posts were full of congratulations and praise for their beautiful family and their inspiring independence. Friends and relatives who knew about my contributions to their life said nothing about my absence from these celebrations. This is such a common tactic among toxic people. They rewrite history to make themselves look like victims or heroes, erasing the contributions of the people they've hurt. I found myself checking their social media obsessively, like picking at a scab. Each new post about their perfect little family was a reminder of what I had lost, or perhaps what I had never really had. 3 days after Madison's birth, my phone finally rang. Greg's name on the caller ID. This is it, I thought. He's going to apologize. He's going to invite me to meet my granddaughter. He's going to realize what he's lost. Mom. Greg's voice sounded strained, exhausted. We're in a bit of a pinch. The hospital bills are higher than we expected, and Leslie can't go back to work for a few more weeks. Can you? I hung up. Can you believe the audacity? 3 days after his daughter was born, 3 days after posting about doing it all on their own, he calls asking for money. Not to share his joy, not to introduce his mother to her granddaughter, but to ask for a bailout. The phone rang again immediately. Mom? Mom, did we get disconnected? No, Greg. We didn't get disconnected. Okay, so like I was saying, we could really use some help right now. The delivery was more complicated than we expected, and there were some additional charges. Just until Leslie goes back to work. Maybe 5,000? 10 would be better, actually, because we want to set up a college fund for Madison. The audacity took my breath away. He hadn't called to tell me about his daughter's birth. He hadn't called to apologize for excluding me from the most important moments of their lives. He hadn't even acknowledged that I was now a grandmother. He had called because he needed money. And notice how he's trying to manipulate her emotions by mentioning a college fund for Madison. He's using his daughter, Lily's granddaughter, as emotional leverage. Ask Leslie, I said calmly. What? You said she'll be going back to work soon. I'm sure she can handle the bills. After all, you're doing it all on your own, remember? I saw the posts. Mom, what are you talking about? This is different. This is family. Is it? I asked. Because when I wanted to come to my granddaughter's baby shower, I was told not to bother. When she was born, no one thought to call me. When you post pictures online, you talk about your little family as if I don't exist. So tell me, Greg, when exactly does this become about family? Silence. This silence is so telling. Greg can't answer because he knows she's right. The only time she matters to him is when he needs money. The answer is that it becomes about family when you need money. That's the only time I matter to you anymore. Not when you want to share joy, not when you want to include me in important moments, but when you need financial support. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you called just to talk? When was the last time you asked how I was doing, or if I was lonely, or if I needed anything? When was the last time you treated me like a person instead of a resource? We've been busy with the pregnancy, and you've been busy for 3 years, Greg. Busy excluding me, busy spending my money, busy building a life that has no room for me except when you need financial help. More silence. I thought so, I said. Goodbye, Greg. Mom, wait. I hung up and immediately blocked his number. Then I called my real estate agent in Oregon. Is the cottage still available? Good. I'd like to accelerate the closing process. I'm ready to move. This moment represents such a powerful turning point. Instead of falling back into old patterns, instead of giving in to guilt or the pull of being needed, Lily chooses herself. She chooses her own peace and dignity over the familiar dysfunction. That night, I sat in my garden for the last time. looking up at the stars and thinking about the granddaughter I might never know. It should have been the saddest moment of my entire ordeal, but instead, I felt something unexpected: relief. I was free. Free from the constant anxiety of wondering when the next request for money would come. Free from the exhausting cycle of giving and being taken for granted. Free from the heartbreak of loving people who only valued me for what I could provide. My granddaughter would grow up without knowing me, and that was tragic. But she would also grow up without a grandmother who was constantly being manipulated and disrespected by her parents. Maybe in some way that was a gift too. And this is such an important realization for Lily. Sometimes protecting yourself means accepting that you'll miss out on relationships you'd love to have. But you can't have healthy relationships with people who refuse to treat you with respect. 2 weeks later, I was living in my cottage in Cedar Falls, watching the sunrise over Mirror Lake with a cup of coffee in my hands and absolute silence surrounding me. For the first time in 27 years, my phone wasn't ringing with demands, requests, or guilt trips. It was blissful. Now this is where Lily's story gets deliciously petty, and honestly, I'm here for it. Sometimes the best way to show someone how little they mean to you is to match their energy exactly. The cottage in Cedar Falls was everything I had hoped it would be. Nestled on the shores of Mirror Lake, surrounded by towering pine trees and absolute tranquility, it felt like stepping into a different world. The locals were friendly but respectful of privacy, the kind of people who nodded in greeting but didn't pry into your business. I introduced myself simply as Lily Adams, the new resident in the lake cottage. No mention of being anyone's mother or grandmother. No complicated family dynamics to explain. Just Lily. For the first time in years, I felt free. I had been in Cedar Falls for 2 months when I decided it was time for my first real act of petty revenge. Not the strategic financial maneuvering I had done before. This was purely for my own satisfaction. I drove to the local bank and opened a checking account with the minimum deposit. Then I wrote out a check for exactly $10, made payable to Gregory Adams and Leslie Adams. In the memo line, I wrote, "For the baby." But I didn't stop there. I drove to the grocery store and, with great amusement, collected every free sample and coupon I could find. Diaper samples, formula coupons, discount offers for baby clothes. I stuffed them all into an envelope along with a $10 check. Finally, I included a note written on plain stationery. "Here's something for the baby, and something for the child raising her." I could picture Leslie's face when she opened that envelope. The confusion, then the growing anger as she realized what I had done. The $10 check would be just enough to buy a pack of diapers, a pathetic amount compared to the thousands Greg had been expecting. And the note? Well, let them figure out whether I was referring to Madison or to Greg as the child. I mailed it from the Cedar Falls post office with a smile on my face. 2 days later, I received a furious voicemail from Greg. Apparently, I hadn't blocked his number as thoroughly as I thought. "Mom, this is ridiculous. $10? And what the hell does that note even mean? Leslie is really upset, and honestly, so am I. This isn't like you. Are you having some kind of mental breakdown? Because if you are, we can get you help, but this passive-aggressive bullshit has to stop." I saved the voicemail. It was delicious proof of how entitled they had become, how completely they failed to understand that their actions had consequences. I didn't call back. Instead, I went for a walk around the lake and then spent the evening painting. I had taken up watercolors since moving to Cedar Falls, and I was discovering I had a real talent for landscapes. The next morning brought another voicemail, this time from Leslie. "Lily, I don't know what your problem is, but you're hurting Greg with this childish behavior. He's trying to be a good father and husband, and the last thing he needs is his mother acting like a teenager. If you want to be part of Madison's life, you need to start acting like an adult." The irony was breathtaking. I was being called childish by the woman who had laughed in the background when my son uninvited me from my own granddaughter's baby shower. I deleted the voicemail and blocked their numbers more thoroughly this time. Then I opened my laptop and began researching my next move. If they wanted to play games, I was just getting started. And this is where Lily's revenge gets really creative. She discovered that sometimes the internet can be your best ally when it comes to exposing the truth about people. Leslie had always been active on social media, particularly Instagram and TikTok, where she presented herself as an aspirational lifestyle influencer. She posted carefully curated photos of their home, their meals, their perfect relationship, and now their beautiful family life with baby Madison. What Leslie didn't know was that I had always been more tech-savvy than she gave me credit for. And I had a lot of time on my hands in Cedar Falls. I started with some basic detective work. Leslie's social media profiles were public, and she had never been particularly careful about her digital footprint. It didn't take long to find screenshots of old posts, photos from before she met Greg, evidence of the person she had been before she decided to reinvent herself as the perfect wife and mother. There were photos from wild college parties, posts complaining about having to visit Greg's boring mother, and some particularly interesting pictures from a girl's trip to Vegas that had taken place just 6 months before Madison was born. But the real gold mine was Leslie's old blog, which she had apparently forgotten existed. It was full of posts about her dating life, her gold digger era, her words, not mine, and her explicit strategy for landing a man with financial potential. One post, dated just 3 months before she met Greg, was titled, "How to Train Your Boyfriend to Bankroll Your Dreams." It included gems like, always act grateful for small gifts while hinting at bigger ones, and make friends with his family, especially his mother. She's your ticket to the inheritance. I screenshot everything. Then I created several anonymous social media accounts and began my campaign of strategic information sharing. First, I posted Leslie's old blog content on a popular forum for mothers with the caption, "Found this old blog post about manipulating men for money. The author now presents herself as a parenting influencer. Thoughts?" The response was immediate and brutal. Hundreds of comments calling Leslie out for her calculated behavior, her obvious gold-digging tactics, and her fake persona. Next, I shared the Vegas photos with some of Leslie's newer mom influencer contacts, along with a caption, "Interesting maternity photos from Leslie's handle. Taken 6 months before baby was born. Very artistic." Several brand collaborations dropped her within the week. But my masterpiece was when I submitted Leslie and Greg's story to a popular Reddit forum called Entitled People, telling the whole tale from my perspective. The uninviting, the demands for money, the complete dismissal of the grandmother who had funded their entire lifestyle. The post went viral within hours. Soon, TikTok users were making reaction videos using the hashtag #CheckPleaseMom. The story spread across multiple platforms, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences with entitled family members and praising the savage grandmother who finally said no. Greg and Leslie's real names weren't mentioned in my original post, but internet sleuths are remarkably efficient. Within days, their photos and social media profiles were being shared alongside captions like, "The entitled couple who told grandma not to bother coming," and "This is what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you." Leslie's aspirational lifestyle brand was in ruins. Her follower count plummeted as people left comments calling her out for her treatment of Greg's mother. Brand partnerships evaporated. The carefully constructed image she had spent years building crumbled in a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, I was living peacefully in Cedar Falls, taking painting classes and enjoying the quiet satisfaction of watching karma work in real time. My phone had been blissfully silent since I blocked their numbers, but I occasionally checked their social media profiles from my anonymous accounts. The decline was swift and brutal. Leslie had gone from posting multiple times a day to radio silence. Greg's LinkedIn profile showed he was between opportunities, which I took to mean he had lost his job amid the online scandal. Perfect, I thought as I set up my easel by the lake one morning. Now they understand what it feels like to have their reputation destroyed by people who don't care about their feelings. What happened next proves that some people will never take responsibility for their actions. Instead of reflecting on how their behavior led to these consequences, they doubled down on victim blaming and manipulation. The online scandal had been devastating for Greg and Leslie, but I wasn't prepared for just how far they would sink in their attempts to restore their reputation and win back my financial support. And this is where their desperation really shows. Instead of genuine apologies or self-reflection, they resort to increasingly manipulative tactics. It started with a care package that appeared on my doorstep one crisp October morning. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting on the label immediately. Inside were baby photos of Madison, professional portraits that must have cost more money than they claimed to have. There was a handwritten card from Greg and a small silver bracelet with "World's Best Grandma" engraved on it. The card was a masterpiece of manipulation. "Mom, I know we've had our differences, but Madison needs her grandmother. I've been thinking about all the sacrifices you made for me growing up, and I realize I haven't been grateful enough. I remember how you worked 2 jobs so I could have the best opportunities, how you drove that old car for years so I could have a computer for college, how you gave up so much for my happiness." Leslie feels terrible about the misunderstanding with the baby shower. She was just overwhelmed with pregnancy hormones and didn't mean to hurt your feelings. We want to make things right. Madison's first Christmas is coming up, and it won't be the same without you. She'll never know how amazing her grandmother is if we don't fix this. Please call us. We love you, and we need you in our lives. Greg. Notice the manipulation tactics here. Appealing to Lily's love for her granddaughter, rewriting history to make Leslie the victim of pregnancy hormones, and using guilt about Christmas to create urgency. I read the card twice, looking for any genuine acknowledgement of their behavior, any real apology for the pain they had caused. Instead, I found excuses, minimization, and emotional blackmail disguised as love. I put the entire package in the trash. The bracelet followed without a second thought. A week later, I received a legal-looking envelope forwarded from my old address. Inside was a letter from a family counselor offering mediation services. Apparently, Greg and Leslie had told this woman that I was suffering from some kind of mental health crisis and refusing contact with my own family. This is such a classic move from toxic people. When they can't manipulate you directly, they try to get authority figures to do it for them. The letter was professionally written but clearly based on false information. Dear Mrs. Adams, I understand that your family is experiencing some difficulties with communication and that there may be some confusion about family roles and expectations. Family estrangement can be very challenging for all parties involved, but with proper professional guidance, these issues can often be resolved. Your son, Gregory, has expressed deep concern about your well-being and would like to work toward reconciliation through mediation. Please contact my office to schedule an appointment. I called the counselor directly. Dr. Martinez? This is Lily Adams. I understand my son contacted you about family mediation. Oh, Mrs. Adams. Yes, I'm so glad you called. Your son is very concerned about you. He mentioned that you've been acting erratically and cutting off contact with your new granddaughter. He's worried that you might be experiencing some kind of emotional crisis related to aging or isolation. Family estrangement can be very difficult to navigate, but with the right support. Dr. Martinez, I interrupted gently. I appreciate your concern, but I need to clarify something. I haven't cut off contact with my granddaughter. My son and daughter-in-law explicitly told me not to attend her baby shower, never called to tell me she was born, and only contact me when they need money. I've simply stopped enabling their behavior. There was a long pause. I see. That's not quite how the situation was presented to me. I'm sure it wasn't. My son and daughter-in-law are very skilled at presenting themselves as victims while rewriting history to suit their narrative. But I'm not mentally ill, Dr. Martinez. I'm not isolated or confused. I'm simply done being treated like an ATM by people who show me no respect or affection unless they want something. This conversation is so important because it shows how Greg and Leslie tried to weaponize mental health professionals against Lily. They're painting her as unstable to deflect from their own behavior. Mrs. Adams, this is quite different from what I was told. Your son mentioned that you had been making erratic financial decisions and exhibiting signs of paranoia. Erratic financial decisions like stopping unlimited access to my bank accounts? Or paranoia like noticing that they only call when they need money? Another pause. I think I may need to reassess this situation. Would you be willing to provide your perspective on these family dynamics? Dr. Martinez, I appreciate your professionalism, but I'm not interested in mediation. You can't mediate with people who refuse to acknowledge their own behavior. My son and daughter-in-law have made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences. That's not a family crisis. That's accountability. I hung up and never heard from Dr. Martinez again. But Greg and Leslie weren't done. And what they try next shows just how far they're willing to go to control the narrative and manipulate public opinion. A few days later, I discovered that they had launched their own social media campaign. Despite their previous humiliation, they began posting regularly again, but with a completely new narrative. Now they were the victims of an unstable family member who had abandoned them during their time of need. Leslie posted long, tearful videos about how difficult it was to be a new mother without family support, how they were struggling financially because of my vindictive behavior, and how much little Madison was missing her grandmother. This is gaslighting on a massive scale. They're literally trying to convince the world that they're the victims in this situation. The posts were carefully crafted to generate sympathy without providing context. Photos of Leslie looking exhausted with baby Madison, captions about doing it alone, videos of Greg talking about how heartbroken he was that his mother had chosen money over family. We've made mistakes, Greg said in one particularly manipulative video. We're young parents trying to figure things out. But families should forgive each other. Families should be there for each other. Instead, my mother has cut us off completely because we asked for help during a difficult time. She's refusing to be part of her granddaughter's life over what? A misunderstanding about a baby shower? Some hurt feelings about money? Notice how he's minimizing everything. The theft becomes asking for help. The systematic exclusion becomes a misunderstanding, and the financial manipulation becomes hurt feelings about money. The comments on these posts were mixed. Some people, who didn't know the full story, expressed sympathy for their situation. But many others remembered the viral Reddit post and called them out for their revisionist history. One comment on Leslie's most recent video made me laugh out loud. Girl, maybe your mother-in-law wouldn't have abandoned you if you hadn't told her not to bother coming to her own granddaughter's baby shower and then stolen her identity to open credit accounts. Actions have consequences. Another commenter wrote, "This is the same couple from that Reddit post, right? The ones who treated grandma like an ATM? Now they're playing victim because she finally said no? The audacity is unreal." And this is where the internet's collective memory becomes Lily's greatest ally. You can't rewrite history when millions of people have already seen the truth. But the most telling responses were from other family members and friends who had stayed silent during the original viral scandal. Now, they began sharing their own stories in the comments. I've watched Leslie manipulate Greg for years. She isolated him from everyone who cared about him. Greg used to be such a good son. Leslie changed him completely. I remember Lily. She was always so generous and kind. This breaks my heart. The desperate attempts at image rehabilitation were backfiring spectacularly. Instead of generating sympathy, they were reminding people why they had lost sympathy in the first place. Meanwhile, I was thriving in my new life. And that's what I love about this part of Lily's story. While Greg and Leslie are desperately trying to control public opinion and manipulate their way back into her good graces, she's moved on to something better. I had been living in Cedar Falls for 6 months, and I was discovering parts of myself that I had forgotten existed. The art classes I had started taking as a distraction had become a genuine passion. My watercolor landscapes were improving dramatically, and the local gallery owner had begun displaying some of my work. "You have a natural eye for composition," she told me after I brought in my latest series of lake paintings. "These are really quite good. Have you considered entering some local competitions?" The idea of competing with my art would have terrified me a year ago. But this new version of myself, the one who had learned to value her own worth, was intrigued by the challenge. I had also joined a book club, made friends with other transplants to Cedar Falls, and even begun dating a lovely retired professor named David, who treated me with the respect and affection I had forgotten I deserved. This relationship with David is so important because it shows Lily what healthy love actually looks like. After years of being taken for granted, she's finally experiencing genuine appreciation and care. "You seem so at peace," David observed one evening as we watched the sunset from my deck. "Like someone who's finally found her place in the world." He was right. I had found my place, and more importantly, I had found myself. The woman who had stood in that New Hampshire kitchen 8 months ago, trembling with hurt and disbelief as her son told her not to bother coming to her granddaughter's baby shower, felt like a stranger to me now. That woman had defined herself entirely through her relationships with others, as Greg's mother, as someone's helper, as a source of financial support for anyone who asked. This woman, the one painting by a lake in Oregon, building a career she loved, surrounded by people who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide, this woman was finally, truly free. But Lily's story isn't over yet. What happens next will test everything she's learned about boundaries, self-worth, and the difference between love and manipulation. This is the moment when Lily discovered just how deep the betrayal went, and when her transformation from victim to victor became complete. I had been living in Cedar Falls for 8 months when I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, tending to the vegetable patch I had planted behind the cottage, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the trees, I could see a silver sedan that I didn't recognize. A woman got out, tall, blonde, professionally dressed. She looked around uncertainly before walking toward my front door. I dusted off my hands and went to meet her, curious about who could be looking for me in this remote location. "Lily Adams?" she asked, extending her hand. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a private investigator." My blood ran cold. Had Greg hired someone to track me down? "What can I do for you, Miss Chen?" "I'm working on a case involving financial fraud, and your name came up in our investigation. May I come in?" "I think you'll find what I have to tell you very interesting." We sat in my living room, the lake view providing a calming backdrop to what turned out to be a shocking revelation. "Mrs. Adams, I've been investigating a case involving identity theft and financial manipulation. Are you familiar with a company called Cascade Investments?" I shook my head. 3 years ago, someone used your personal information to open several credit lines and investment accounts with Cascade. The total amount involved is approximately $180,000. My mouth fell open. I never open any accounts with Cascade Investments. "I know." The signature analysis shows clear forgery, and the initial applications were submitted online using your social security number and personal information. The interesting thing is that all the money was transferred to accounts controlled by Gregory Adams and Leslie Adams. The room started spinning. "Are you saying my son stole my identity?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. We believe this started around the time of his marriage, and it's been ongoing for 3 years. The credit card statements and investment documents were being sent to a P.O. box that Leslie opened using a fake ID with your name. Sarah spread out documents across my coffee table. Credit applications with my forged signature. Bank statements showing massive withdrawals. Investment accounts that had been drained to fund Greg and Leslie's lifestyle. The beach house you sold last year? Sarah continued. They had already taken out a home equity loan against it for $85,000. They were counting on inheriting the property to cover the debt. When you sold it, the loan company came looking for their money. I stared at the evidence in front of me, feeling physically sick. This wasn't just about being treated poorly or taken for granted. This was criminal fraud. How did you find me? I asked. The credit companies started investigating when the payments stopped coming. They traced the fraud back to your son and daughter-in-law, but when they tried to contact you at your old address, they learned you had moved. It took some detective work to track you down here. What happens now? That's up to you. You can press charges for identity theft, fraud, and forgery. The evidence is overwhelming. Your son and daughter-in-law would likely face federal charges and significant prison time. I sat in silence for a long time, processing everything I had learned. Greg hadn't just been ungrateful and entitled, he had been actively stealing from me for years. Every time I had helped them financially, thinking I was being a generous mother, they had been robbing me behind my back. Mrs. Adams? Sarah prompted gently. What would you like to do? I looked out at the lake, at the peaceful life I had built for myself in this beautiful place. I thought about the stress and drama that pressing charges would bring, the court dates and media attention and complicated legal proceedings. Then I thought about the $180,000 they had stolen. Money that could have funded my retirement, paid for travel, secured my future. I want to press charges, I said firmly. All of them. Sarah smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. And this is where Lily's story reaches its perfect conclusion. Not with dramatic confrontations or emotional reconciliations, but with the quiet satisfaction of justice served and a life well lived. The legal proceedings took 6 months. Greg and Leslie were arrested at their apartment in a scene that, according to the police report, involved Leslie screaming about how unfair it all was while baby Madison cried in the background. They both eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, and forgery. Greg was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Leslie received 2 years, suspended pending completion of community service and full restitution. The story made the local news, though I declined all interview requests. I had no interest in public vindication or media attention. The legal system had spoken, and that was enough for me. The $180,000 they had stolen was returned to me, plus interest and penalties that Greg and Leslie would be paying off for the rest of their lives. Their wages would be garnished, their assets seized, their credit destroyed for decades. Meanwhile, I was flourishing in Cedar Falls. I had become a regular at the local art center, where my watercolor paintings were beginning to attract attention. The owner of a small gallery in town asked to feature some of my lake scenes in a group show, and, to my amazement, 3 of them sold on opening night. You have real talent, the gallery owner told me. Have you ever considered this as more than a hobby? I laughed. I'm 55 years old. Isn't it a bit late to start a new career? Grandma Moses was in her 70s when she started painting professionally, she replied. It's never too late to discover who you're meant to be. For the first time in my adult life, I was earning money from something I loved rather than giving it away to people who didn't appreciate it. The freedom was intoxicating. I joined a book club, made friends with other transplants to Cedar Falls, and even began dating a lovely retired professor named David, who treated me with the respect and affection I had forgotten I deserved. You seem so at peace, David observed one evening as we watched the sunset from my deck. Like someone who's finally found her place in the world.
He was right.
I had found my place and, more importantly, I had found myself. This transformation is what I love most about Lily's story. She didn't just get revenge on people who wronged her. She discovered who she was when she wasn't constantly giving pieces of herself away to ungrateful people. 1 year after Greg's sentencing, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from Leslie, written on cheap notebook paper in handwriting that looked shaky and desperate. Dear Lily, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I had to try. Greg is in prison, and I'm raising Madison alone. I'm working 2 jobs just to make ends meet, and the restitution payments are killing me financially. I know I made mistakes, but Madison is innocent in all this. She needs her grandmother. Could we please talk? I'm willing to apologize for everything if you'll consider helping us get back on our feet. I promise things will be different this time.
Please call me.
Leslie. I read the letter twice, then walked to my fireplace and tossed it into the flames. Different this time. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after being convicted of stealing from me, even after everything that had happened, Leslie still thought she could manipulate me with guilt about Madison. But I felt no guilt. Madison was innocent, but she wasn't my responsibility. Her parents had made choices that destroyed their family, and now they were living with the consequences. 2 months later, another letter arrived, this time from Greg himself, postmarked from federal prison. Mom, I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. But I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I realize how wrong I was. You didn't deserve any of what we put you through. I was selfish and entitled and cruel. Leslie brought out the worst in me, but that's not an excuse. I made my own choices. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for money or help. I just needed you to know that I remember the mom who sacrificed everything for me, and I'm ashamed of how I repaid that love. I hope you're happy wherever you are. You deserve happiness more than anyone I know. I love you, Greg. This letter I didn't burn. I read it several times over the course of a week, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was still love there, buried under years of hurt and disappointment. Part of me, the part that had rocked him to sleep as a baby and cheered at his school plays, wanted to respond. But the wiser part of me, the part that had learned to value my own peace and happiness, knew better. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Maybe someday I would feel differently. Maybe when Greg was released from prison, he would prove that his apology was genuine through his actions rather than his words. But for now, I was content with my new life. And you know what?
That's perfectly okay.
Lily doesn't owe anyone forgiveness just because they're family. She doesn't owe anyone a second chance just because they say they're sorry. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away and let people face the consequences of their choices. 2 years later, I was sitting by Mirror Lake with my easel set up, working on a painting of the morning mist rising from the water. The local art scene had embraced me completely, and my work was now featured in galleries throughout Oregon. I had even been commissioned to create a series of paintings for a luxury resort in California. At 57, I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of, but never thought I deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Dinner at Giuseppe's tonight? I have some news to share. I smiled and texted back. Can't wait to hear it. David and I had been together for over a year now, and he had brought joy and companionship into my life that I hadn't experienced since Greg was a small child. He valued my opinions, respected my independence, and never once made me feel like I existed solely to serve his needs. This was what a healthy relationship looked like. This was what I had been missing all those years when I poured all my energy into people who took without giving back. As I packed up my painting supplies, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The phone call that had shattered my world had actually been a gift in disguise. It had forced me to see the truth about my relationship with Greg and Leslie, and it had given me the courage to choose myself for the first time in my adult life. The woman who had stood in that New Hampshire kitchen, trembling with hurt and disbelief, felt like a stranger to me now. That woman had defined herself entirely through her relationships with others, as Greg's mother, as someone's helper, as a source of financial support. This woman, the one painting by a lake in Oregon, building a career she loved, surrounded by people who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide, this woman was finally, truly free. This is what real success looks like. Not revenge for the sake of revenge, but the courage to walk away from toxicity and build something beautiful in its place. That evening at dinner, David shared his news. He had been offered a position teaching at the local community college, which would mean staying in Cedar Falls permanently. "I hope that's okay with you," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I know we haven't talked about the future seriously, but I can't imagine being anywhere you're not." I squeezed his hand and smiled. I can't imagine being anywhere else either. As we walked back to my cottage that night, arm in arm under a sky full of stars, I thought about all the different paths my life could have taken. I could have continued enabling Greg's entitled behavior, could have let guilt and obligation keep me trapped in relationships that drained my soul. Instead, I had chosen myself. I had chosen dignity over family peace, self-respect over obligation, and happiness over guilt. And in choosing myself, I had found everything I had been looking for. 3 months later, I received one final piece of correspondence from my old life. It was a legal document notifying me that Greg had been released from prison and that Leslie had filed for divorce. I read the notification once, then filed it away without emotion. Their story was no longer my story. Their choices were no longer my responsibility. Their pain was no longer my problem to solve. My story now was one of sunrise paintings and gallery openings, of quiet dinners with David and long walks around the lake, of friendships built on mutual respect and genuine affection. This is the power of choosing yourself. When you stop accepting less than you deserve, when you stop enabling people who don't value you, when you prioritize your own happiness and well-being, amazing things can happen. I was Lily Adams. I was 57 years old. I was a successful artist, a valued member of my community, and a woman who had learned that it's never too late to start over. And I had never been happier. The phone call that had once seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of everything. The moment my son told me not to bother coming had been the moment I finally stopped bothering with people who didn't appreciate me. Some journeys end with reconciliation and forgiveness. Some journeys end with second chances and redemption. But the best journeys, the ones that truly matter, end with self-discovery and peace. This was my journey. This was my choice. This was my life. And it was beautiful. That's the end of Lily's incredible story. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt taken for granted by people who should value you most, I want you to remember Lily's courage. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. It's never too late to start over. If you love this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with any woman in your life who needs to hear that she matters too. And let me know in the comments, what did you think of Lily's decision? Do you think she was right to cut ties completely, or should she have given Greg another chance after his apology? Your comments and stories inspire our entire community, and I read every single one. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss another story about women who found their strength in the darkest moments. Until next time, remember, you are worth fighting for. You deserve to put yourself first. And sometimes the best thing you can do for people who don't appreciate you is to stop being available for them to take advantage of. This is Her Journey, where every woman's story matters. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.